establishing a more just multipolar architecture. This resolution will, of course, will underpin the systematic efforts and anti-colonial efforts undertaken by Russia, along with a wide number of like-minded states. The next important step on this path will be thematic debates to be scheduled on the 18th of December at the UN General Assembly. And today, on the website of the Foreign Ministry, a report was released, and maybe someone has already seen it, and this report will be placed on all our resources. And I'm talking about the next report dedicated on the position of Russian compatriots living abroad. This question is focused by the ministry. It is symbolic that this day is aligned with the Human Rights Day, which was celebrated yesterday, an international day. The relevant statement was released on the website of our ministry, and now it will be added up with the format report. Recently, there is a kind of a positive trend when in some countries there was a decreased number of anti-Russian narratives, but the problem still remains. Because in general, the violation of the rights of our compatriots remaining a pillar stone of the policy of the Western states. As a pretext, the Western states and the collective West suggests as a special military operation to denazify, demilitarize Ukraine. Amid this rhetoric of the so-called aggressive behavior of Russia in the West, the West starts to rearm, increase their military expenses, supporting instigators and extremists who are trying to disrupt the unity of the people of Russia. And that's the main mission of them. It's not a kind of our metaphor. It's and I just quote them. This is a convincing example of the systematic crisis of human rights institutes, which, addressing discrimination of other ethnic communities, just completely ignore discrimination of the Russian-speaking population. Our compatriots, especially in the closest Russian neighboring countries. This reaffirms that the anti-Russia narrative is being viewed as a kind of permission for the most flagrant human rights violation and complete ignorance of the international law. And so we need to note that the report includes information on discrimination of the Russian compatriots living abroad, while the information about the state of deterioration of the Western regimes. So this information is contained in another report prepared by the Ministry on manifestations of neo-Nazism, released on our website. And links will be in the text of the briefing. I would like to mention that Russophobic narrative is being showed in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Ukraine. An unprecedented level of squeezing out of the Russian language and the Russian-speaking people from the education, restricting this way the rights of their own citizens to get educated in their mother tongue. There were also fixed the first steps by the Balkan states in preparation of mass deportations, which affected the elderly as well. Russophobia is being aggravated in Moldova and Finland. Of course, these guidelines used by the Baltic states and by Moldova are being sent by the regimes, and I'm talking about the Anglo-Saxon regimes. And this is all made through NATO, of course. Russia won't tolerate such large-scale manifestations of intolerance and will counteract. We will trace the situation, fix the discrimination acts against Russians, and seek that the government implemented the international obligations. We hope that this report will advance the elaboration of measures to fight discrimination and help to prevent such negative scenarios in the future. But this negative is not a general term. In fact, these statements are intolerable, flagrant manifestations that shame the humankind of the 21st century. And the topic, which today is of concern of many people, is the detention in Poland of the Russian scientist Alexander Butyagin. And we've already made a comment on this, but I can once again repeat on the request of journalists. I'm talking about the scientist of the St. Petersburg Hermitage, and we believe that the accusations against the Russian citizens and scientists and archaeologists allegedly as the accusation used of, and I quote, in eliminating the cultural heritage. And I think it's a kind of a pretext by Kiev regime. In fact, he worked in our country, on the territory of our country, Russia. This is highly politicized provocation. It's not a legal case. We will seek liberation of Alexander Butyagin. And this situation once again reaffirms the relevance of our warnings to refuse and to refrain from trips to non-friendly states where our citizens can confront with illegitimate, politically motivated acts by local authorities. And the situation in Ukraine. I will start by saying that yesterday many countries in the West were surprised, and there was a statement by Keir Starmer in the parliament, it was yesterday, where he publicly confirmed the information on the death on the 9th of December of the British military of someone named Hooley, the death of the British citizens and subjects. This is the responsibility of the British government. There is a minor comment. He died in Ukraine. And many people in the UK and in other Western countries wondered, what did he do there? The presence of the British military in Ukraine, there is no secret to anyone. There's no secret to anyone, to all those reasonable people. We've warned about the provocations in 2022, the provocations by the UK government in Ukraine against Russia. But after 2022, we publicly stated that UK was involved in the conflict, directly involved, and in all the events accompanying it, and their complicity on the side of the Kiev regime, but complicity in terrorist acts committed by the Kiev regime and its henchmen. So this information struck many people in the UK. Once again, the presence of the British military in Ukraine should not be a surprise to anyone. And if we hear such surprise outcries, then this will show that Great Britain is undergoing an outrageous propaganda preventing the truth about their compatriots. So, what's interesting here? We've heard on many occasions from officials in London, not to mention the fact that the subjects of the UK, the military in Ukraine, do their service, but a kind of a restricted duties, including the protection of the diplomatic corps in Ukraine and employing the Ukrainian army, and nothing else. They do nothing else there. But in the statements by Starmer, it was all got right when the authorities publicly announced about the death of their military during the conflict. And the head of the cabinet said that this military helped Ukraine to fight for freedom. And we need to know the details, and we'll find them out. But London should be honest with what he was doing. And I'm talking about this soldier and military, I'm sorry. Maybe somewhere in the UK started to prepare the public opinion to the military losses in Ukraine, the unprecedented number of losses. And the government of the United Kingdom will be compelled to speak about this topic with their own citizens. And I know that they hesitate to talk about the crimes, for example, in Afghanistan, committed by the UK. But sometime later, they will have to answer all their requests, including from the law enforcement authorities. What is now being penetrated in the UK media, it's a scenario which was caused by the deployment of the military contingent in Ukraine, but in fact this is the occupation forces. What is interesting here that amid this, the UK mass media, and I quote, "The first British military officer was killed in the Ukrainian conflict." I would like to warn, just in case, the British journalists that it's not the first one. What's interesting, how will the government sort it out? But that's not the first case. This criminal idea with a kind of coalition of desires, the whole responsibility will be put on London. Our position is well known. Any foreign army will be viewed as a legitimate target for the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And let the UK government not lie to its subjects and don't lie about those who are being sent there from the United Kingdom. Those who are sent there, they conduct direct instructions of the UK government in Ukraine. They commit acts of sabotage, terrorist acts, extremist tasks as well. And this is their job. And the mastermind is official London. And now we'll switch to some other aspects. In Ukraine, the Kiev neo-Nazi regime continues to commit war crimes and acts of terrorism against Russia. Within the last week, the Ukrainian shells and drones injured 65 people. 7 died, 58 injured, including 1 child. And I would like to cite some facts. In Belgorod region, on the 4th and 5th December, the Ukrainian drones in Graivoron, Shebekino, Borisovka, in Yekaterinovka, in Belyanka and Volchi settlement districts The drones injured at least 15 civilians, including the head of administration of the Berezovsky settlement, Mr. Borisenko. On the 5th of December, the Kiev militants attempted an assassination on the head of the Electoral Commission, Mr. Lavrov, with a drone, which attacked his car. Luckily, at that moment, there was no one in the car. The 8th of December, in the settlement Gora Podol, the drone injured a cyclist. In Bryansk region, December the 5th and the 6th, in the settlement Voronok and Mirsky, the drone injured 2 people. In DPR, December the 6th, because of the blast of the GP bomb in Gorlovka, a woman died, injuring a 19-year-old young boy and an 18-year-old girl. In Zaporizhia region, the 5th of December, the building of the Vasilyevsk hospital and an ambulance machine were destroyed. On the 6th of December, the attacks hit of the Vasilyevsk municipal region and injuring 3 people, damaging grid lines and gas pipeline. And a citizen from Vasilyevka suffered from the attack. LPR, on the 4th of December, the drone attacked the Svatovsk Central Hospital. The building is damaged, no one died. One received a blast injury. In Kherson region, in Novaya Mayachka settlement, 2 people died, 2 men, and the elderly woman was injured.
Chuvashia region on December 9th, as a result of a targeted strike by Ukrainian UAV on a residential building in Cheboksar, at least 14 people were injured, including a child. On December 4th, American military correspondent Patrick Lancaster shared with journalists how Russian servicemen rescued his mother-in-law and her husband from the threat of reprisals by Ukrainian armed forces militants during the liberation of Alexeivka village in the DPR on June 12th, 2024. According to the woman's testimony, foreign mercenaries and Bandera supporters shot at civilians, beat her and burned her house. Earlier in 2014, she had already lost her home in Donetsk as a result of shelling by the armed forces of Ukraine. And of course, all these crimes will be punished. All the criminals will be punished. Russian law enforcement agencies continue to work to bring Ukrainian war criminals to justice. The Prosecutor General's Office of Russia has approved the indictment of 41 representatives of the political and military leadership of the Kiev regime in the criminal case on the genocide of the population of the DPR and LPR. Among the accused are Arsen Avakov, Andrei Yermak, Vasily Maluk, Petro Poroshenko, Alexander Syrsky, Alexander Turchinov, Denis Shmygal, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, and others. As a result of punitive operations carried out in Donbass on the orders of these individuals, since 2014, nearly 5,000 civilians have been killed, 18,500 people have been injured, and more than 13,500 people have been wounded. 1,275 of those are minors. Partially or completely, they've destroyed more than 153,000 civil infrastructure facilities, including approximately 138,000 residential buildings, 1,565 educational and 847 medical organizations and institutions, 1,403 social facilities, manufacturing commercial enterprises, at least 11,500 life support and public utility facilities, 505 cultural institutions and sport facilities, 205 religious buildings. The accused have been placed on an international wanted. Kursk region captured Ukrainian armed forces militants. Alexander Zherebnoy and Artem Chibisov have been sentenced to long terms of imprisonment, 16 years each, to 22 years in prison. prison were given as a sentence to Sebastian Zaikin and Valery Yermak to continue to kill Ukrainian civilians, has become the leading sponsor of the war. As noted by Polish Minister of Defense Sikorski, the aforementioned $500 million will be used, among other things, to purchase anti-missile systems for Ukraine for American Patriot air defense missile systems. On December 5th, Swedish Minister for International Cooperation and Foreign Trade, Benjamin Duse, announced his ministry plans by 31st of August 2026 to reduce financial aid to Tanzania, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Liberia, and Bolivia. And for what exactly? Perhaps Sweden is concerned with the issues of their own population. Not at all. I have to take it in quotation marks. This saved up money that was first and foremost promised to the countries that really needed it, because colonialism was rampant there. All that money, that is approximately $170 million, to Bankovo. Did you hear? Zelensky ran out again, so they need to refuel him. And at the same time, Stockholm even intends to close the embassies in at least 3 of the countries mentioned. And why exactly? Because they need to send even more money to sponsor killings of Ukrainian citizens. They will do anything in order to support the corrupted Kyiv regime. And why? Well, probably because the Bankovo regime has been hinting to all the sponsors that they have information about their real involvement in their affairs. That's how they've covered for terrorist acts and extremists, how they've stomped on the very definition of human rights, freedom, and democracy, sponsoring killings by the Kyiv regime of those they consider their own citizens. The prohibition of the language that is the maternal language for millions, and other signs of inhumane treatment. And of course, once again, there is the pertinent issue of the presidential elections in Ukraine. How is that going to go? You see, even the US President Donald Trump mentioned to Politico on December 8th this year that the Kyiv regime, direct quote, is using the war to avoid holding elections. That's just admitting the obvious. Another quote, I think now is the time to hold them. The Ukrainian people should have that choice. They have been talking about democracy for a long time, but this is no longer democracy, said Mr. Trump. On December 10th this year, Zelensky responded by stating his readiness for elections, conditional. Can you imagine? He's even posing conditions, conditional on the elections being held during martial law with the introduction of appropriate amendments to the current legislation of Ukraine, as well as the United States and Europe ensuring the security of the electoral process. Can you imagine? I am surprised that Mr. Zelensky did not demand that Brussels or the European Commission to change the law of European states so that he could have more comfort in holding the elections in Europe. That's unprecedented. That in order to hold the elections in the sovereign state, in an independent state, they followed the demands of other sovereign states to provide for such conditions. I would understand if there was such call for assistance for the much loved by the West and the Kyiv regime to the OSCE that is aimed at controlling the elections, or other monitoring organizations and structures specializing in observing, who are supposed to assist, fix, and perhaps provide assistance on request of certain states. That would be understandable. But I can hardly imagine if they had enough audacity, but they probably would have enough audacity to ask for money for these elections. Perhaps that's still coming, considering the sums they've already received. Perhaps that's enough to print the papers with boxes to tick them during the election. But to demand from their own mentors, from sovereign states, to provide these conditions in Ukraine to hold the elections. That's something totally unprecedented. Zelensky clearly wants to remain in power, that's clear, but at the same time, no one has any doubt that he has zero chance of being legally re-elected. He can only win by using the very well tested by the West so-called Moldovan scenario involving voters from among representatives of the Ukrainian diaspora living in Europe, the US, Canada, and other countries. That's the international carousel that has already been tested. Under the watchful eye of Sandu, perhaps something similar or something improved is planned by Zelensky in order to use it in the Ukrainian territory. According to available information, Zelensky discussed this option at a meeting with the head of the World Congress of Ukrainians, recognized in Russia as an undesirable organization, Paul Grod, during his stay in New York in September this year, at the high-level week of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. When addressing his compatriots, he presented the task with conducting an audit of ethnic Ukrainians living abroad to assess their loyalty to the Kyiv regime. As a result, proposals should be prepared to strip individuals who criticize Zelensky of their citizenship, and measures should be taken to prevent pro-Russian or opposition-minded compatriots from voting. Is it clear what Zelensky wants from the West? He wants to hold the elections, not as generally understood. He is not interested in elections in Ukraine. He is interested in being re-elected. And in return, the World Congress of Ukrainians was promised increased funding and other kinds of support. I believe if they agree to that, day will come when Zelensky will incorporate it into voting points abroad, as well as the inscription points, in order to get re-elected and start another mobilization for his population, as he likes doing it, trying to kill everyone. At the same time, all this horrible, terrible things happening in Ukraine is no longer ignored. Someone starts speaking timidly, others more bravely. What Western experiments in Ukraine have led to. On December 8th, Luxembourg's Minister of the Interior, Leon Glodden, stated in an interview on the Paper Jam website, that was a direct quote, "I know that over many months, the number of Ukrainian refugees arriving in Luxembourg under temporary protection has been steadily increasing. This phenomenon is characteristic of the whole of Europe. As the conscription age is lowered, more and more young people are fleeing Ukraine. And as a human being," said the Minister of Luxembourg, "I understand them. However, there's a sense of strangeness because on the one hand," said the representative of Luxembourg, "we're sending weapons and money to Ukraine so that it can defend itself. And on the other hand, people are fleeing from there. So we have to decide either one or the other. It won't work to do both." End of quote. So gradually, perhaps at a different speed, but they're finally getting the idea that the arms and money they keep supplying to the Kyiv regime are not exactly reaching the target. And the people who Zelensky uses to hide as a pretext when asking for money and arms for the West have no desire to fight whatsoever. And the only way to combine the arms they receive with these people is to start the conscription forcefully. So someone in the West is finally starting to guess the true nature of this scheme. Maybe not guess, but just voice it aloud. And it is unclear whether this statement is intended to prepare public opinion for the curtailment of aid to Ukraine or for the cancellation of temporary protection status for men of conscription age. However, it's obvious that 6 months ago it would have been unthinkable to hear anything like this from a member of the government of Luxembourg. They used to repeat as a mantra that this is the moment of truth on the protection of rights of Ukrainian citizens, and the Luxembourg authorities have consistently made a bet on nothing but supporting Kiev at any price as much as necessary. And now, bit by bit, as they understand exactly where Ukraine has been led, actually they don't care for that, where they have led themselves, and whether Ukraine is pulling them, and that is the very bottom. Now, there are very careful attempts of asking questions. Meanwhile, Ukraine is showcasing the growth of Nazism, evidence of the commitment of modern Bandera followers to Nazi and basically satanic ideology continues to multiply. On December 6, Ukrainian public figures published a message about the installation of a memorial sign in Uzhhorod to the 128th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, with its chevron placed on the pedestal with the emblem of the Wehr Infantry Division Edelweiss and two crossed Hutzel axes. After analyzing the social media accounts of the members of the volunteer unit of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Freker, operating in the Kharkiv direction, journalists discovered that they are followers of Satanism and neo-paganism. In photos posted online, the militants pose with the corresponding symbols and attributes. And this is yet another testament to the neo-Nazis' commitment to misanthropic ideology. And I've already mentioned a few words, but we continue to speak about this regularly on the mobilization campaign in Ukraine and on the lowering of conscription age. Zelensky's regime is pursuing a policy of tightening the mobilization campaign. On December 2nd this year, Fyodor Venislavsky, a member of the Verkhovna Rada, announced that parliamentarians intend to return to consideration of the bill on repressive measures against draft dodgers, which did not receive support in 2024. In particular, they propose that Ukrainians who fail to report to those centers of conscription or who leave military units without permission should have their bank accounts blocked and be prohibited from driving. To be fair, I believe this should be labeled as the warming up of what we've seen in reality, because they get beaten up to death, especially those who do not want willingly to lay their lives. Further, Venislavsky made it clear that in the interests of returning territories, measures are being developed to involve the population, including women, in national resistance and universal military training. It is no surprise that against this backdrop, the Kiev regime's attempt to lure young people into contract service in the army resulted in failure. On December 1st, Reuters reported that only a few dozen volunteers, so-called volunteers, had joined the ranks of the armed forces. They have no desire to fight, but no one is listening to them. Neither the Ukrainian mass media nor the Western ones. The people of Ukraine speak their truth if they were given the chance. They've understood how they were led astray, how they were led into this bloodbath. Perhaps it's hard to admit, but it's clear they no longer want to fight. They understand that they were sold, they were betrayed in the most horrible, disgusting way, because they were lied to when they were promised peace, and they did not follow it blindly, but that's what they signed their names under by choosing the absolute non-professional Zelensky. They had nothing in mind but peace, perhaps equal rights in the society. These simple headlines he used that we should live fairly, we should work. Everyone has the right to speak their own language. Those are the general ideals and values. That's what they've responded to in Ukraine back in the day. How he was on his knees in front of Ukrainians, apologizing for the crime.
At Replit, we believe everyone should be able to create software without limits and without knowing how to code. Today, we're proud to announce a major breakthrough, introducing Agent 3, an autonomous agent for everyone. It's a 10x increase in autonomy. More progress, less micromanaging, and more time for your ideas. Runs on its own for hours, handling full tasks autonomously using natural language. Can now test and fix its code, ensuring every part of your software works. Our vision was never to just build a tool. We set out to create a teammate, and we can't wait to see what you're going to build with it.
Those who claim to be their mentors, their representatives, hide their relatives and children as far as possible, putting them in Germany, in the UK, the US, Canada, and so on. Just take a look. It's all clear in exact examples.
Nothing is said without confirmation by digits, references to the quotes, and so on. So 11 contractors, from which 4 were injured. This is 36%. 3 left, disappeared, sent, went a wall, and 1, I'm sorry, but 1 person committed a suicide, and this is 9%. Can you imagine that? That's the report of their work, and the report on attracting to civil service, to the contract service. The manpower shortage for the Kiev regime can become much more worsening. What can be more deteriorating? In accordance with the statistic report of the United Nations released on the 5th of December, on October 13th and 14th November, about 130,000 people fled Ukraine, compared to the previous 9 months, and 166,000 persons. Most of them are young people aged 25 and younger. And I think that the response is one. They love Ukraine. They want to speak Ukrainian. They know Russian and Ukrainian. No. They are patriots, but what makes them flee? I think they don't want to die. No, they are ready to die, but they do not want to become victims of Zelensky's corruption. They do not want to die for the Zelensky and the whole Hill family and all his closest allies and friends filled up their pockets. That's what they do not want to see. That's why they flee. We can talk a lot about that. If you love your country, you go and defend its interests. But it's not about this. The matter is that the citizens of Ukraine woke up to the idea that they were betrayed in a very flagrant way, and no one on the bunker is going to stop. And the population is becoming more and more discontent with forced mobilization. People show hatred towards the military units, the policemen. They even try to fight in order to liberate their recruits. They hit the cars of the so-called territorial center for recruitment. Very often they use cold and sometimes light weapons to liberate the recruits. Yes, for us, we view them as opponents and rivals. And there is no doubt that we will fight for our soldiers and for our people, but we see that the citizens of Ukraine have already made their choice. They show and say publicly that they are ready at any means, especially in view of the fact that they won't be able to say it in public, to say that they do not tolerate such an attitude from the regime of Zelensky, which occupied Ukraine. And he is not alone. It's not just a group of Zelensky, plus Medic and his allies. I refer to all those who unleashed coup d'etat and then bloodiest massacre in Ukraine, the political elites of the West, who fill up their pockets at the expense of Ukraine for over several years. But the Zelensky regime doesn't stop. He does it under the guise of the benefit for Ukraine. And how can he prove it? Only eradicating the Russian language in order to consolidate his position in the society. The language terrorism in Ukraine is gaining momentum, targeting the most vulnerable citizens, children. In late November, a teacher from the White Church complained in social media that the kindergarten which her son visited, there was a girl who spoke Russian, and the so-called teacher, if we can name her a teacher, discriminates, came to the kindergarten and started bullying the child. And this case was brought to public, she said that the girl was speaking incorrectly and then asked the teacher to correct the child. And what is more important and scary, that this deed was supported by the ombudsman, the language ombudsman, Yelena Ivanovskaya, saying that the kindergarten, likewise school, this is a space where a child should be brought up as a Ukrainian. And that's ridiculous and scary at the same time. When I was a little girl, I went to the kindergarten in our embassy, the embassy of the Soviet Union, and the kindergarten was international. Likewise, the school. And many other children from other countries visited this kindergarten, including Cuba, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, back then this country existed, the Polish children from various countries. A real international class and group in the kindergarten. And right now I'm struck by the idea that if anyone could have said back then that the kindergarten or a school, this is a space where a child should be brought up in some ethnic minority, as a representative of some ethnic minority. No way, there was no way for that. There were evenings, holidays, and just kind of performances on the occasion of the New Year. Different events were hosted in the kindergarten for all the kids. And back then, for the kids from the Soviet Union, and right now for the kids from Russia, the ethnic and cultural diversity has always been highlighted. There was an opportunity for featuring their cultural identity. And right now in Ukraine, we are seeing that kindergarten and the school are now places to bring up Ukrainians. But if it turns out that this kid is of other nationality, so what's the way out? But they answered. They just overnight included all Russia-speaking citizens into non-Ukrainians, so they rule the destiny of children of other nationalities. That's not a kind of a person who is This was committed by a person, official representative of the government of Ukraine. Of course, we can admit some mistakes. They could have said that everybody misinterpreted the situation, or just admit the fault, or just try to correct it. But here we don't see any acts. This is a nationalist policy, what we are seeing in the government of the Kiev regime. Another cynical example with a girl who was deprived of the present on the Saint Nicholas Day because of speaking Russian. But back then these posts were deleted and the local authorities denied this fact. But I don't know whether this happened or not, but the matter is that these cases are quite often. There are no specialized programs. No one knows about such cases that would investigate on how many people want to speak Russian language or other languages. But unfortunately, they do not have not even an opportunity, but even bullied for this. But in due account that discrimination of the Russian-speaking population is a systematic policy conducted by Ukraine, dictated from above, such cases, some of them, let me repeat, are confirmed, others are refuted, but everyone knows that this is a part of the current policy of the Ukrainian. And what's the most absurd and striking topic, it's the case with the abducted, as they put it, children from Ukraine. Yelena Zelenskaya on international fora advances the topic that it's a kind of invented story on abducted children, Ukrainian children, describing their sufferings, their occupation, that they're being deprived of their self-identity. In fact, the main enemy of all Ukrainians, including the minor, this is the anti-people regime of Zelensky and him personally. So the tutors, bloggers, the so-called linguistic activists bully and insult the Russian-speaking children with impunity, labeling them as incorrect and requiring and demanding on somewhat correction. And this is the Nazi ideology. This is the replacement of the language identity, forced replacement. The representatives of the battalions Azov, Aidar, Kraken screw up children, teaching in some summer camps the children to hate the Muscovites and conducting monstrous psychological experiments, making kill pets, their own pets, in order to incite the lowest feelings in children. And that's the kind of identity imposed by the regime, the Zelensky regime. It's not a regime, it's indoctrination. That's what they are doing, but blaming the others. The Bankovaya tries to conceal their own crimes against children, but the facts are telling, and you cannot hide the truth. Last week there was an outrageous, high-profile case associated with the Yelena Zelensky Foundation, who in spring 2022 organized the kind of humanitarian evacuation to Turkey, a group of miners from Dnipropetrovsk. And I remember quite well this event. Now journalists received a report of the delegation of the Ukrainian ombudsman, UNICEF and the Turkish ombudsman, who in 2024 made a monitoring visit in order to check the living conditions of the evacuated minor, those who were saved. And it all ended up by the following. It turned out that many children which were saved by Madam Zelensky became victims of psychological and sexual harassment. They were deprived, didn't taken care of, they didn't have a chance to teach, they were filmed in propaganda videos, they were starved and humiliated. And what is striking, that 2 girls came back to Ukraine pregnant. Good summer holidays. Great care of the Kiev regime of the children. Do you think whether anyone was brought to justice for these crimes? One of the teachers became now a teacher of physical culture, and that's it. On December the 10th, it became known that a criminal group was revealed which illegally deported Ukrainian children abroad. 25 minor were already victims, fell victims. 13 of them have been already sent to foreign states. To circumvent the ban for interstate orphanage and custody, they take fake contracts, they faked programs, engaging corruption ties at the high level. And I think Van Zelensky was involved in this case. Without support from the above, this group would have failed. And the only thing I would like to say here, that we have sent many requests to them, calling for providing some numbers about the alleged abducted children. We've asked them on many occasions to confirm the data with the figures. In fact, on international fora, Ukraine outcried that it's about 100 million, or at least hundreds people. But then the number were changed. But in fact, they speak about 1,000 people. But we knew only about 139 children. And a lot of information was unconfirmed as a result. And all those whose information is being revealed, this work is going on in order to confirm this. The evidence that was provided by Ukraine is not a real evidence. They exacerbate and go into hyperbole, saying that the number was much more. All those children who were sold, abducted, indeed there are thousands of them. And the citizens are aware of this fact. They know these children, the families, and in order to avoid any answers, to avoid answering the question, where are the children, the Kiev regime invents an idea that these abducted children, that they end up in Russia. But in fact, that's not the case. In fact, these children are in the Western Europe, in the neighboring states, the states neighboring to Ukraine. They were deported with the help of Ukrainians. These children are not in Russia. The Bankovaya Street needs these numbers in order to explain its own citizens the destination of all these child abducted, but Russia has nothing to do with these abductions. Neither human rights organizations nor leaders of Western countries or NGOs don't pay any attention, do not concern about the destiny of the child. There were a lot of examples. No coalition has been established for their return. The International Criminal Court has not issued an arrest warrant for Yelena Zelenskaya and other criminal groups. This silence says that neither Kiev regime nor its Kiev curators, are interested only in one thing. The first, to distort attention from the battlefield and to hide the real success of Russia. They are seeking to explain to their own citizens the location of the Ukrainian children, bullying and trying to make both citizens fight.
The Yelena Zelenskaya Foundation earns money by holding presentations of its projects in Western capitals with the participation of political elite and Hollywood stars, while the children's issue is used on the international stage for anti-Russian propaganda, so it's convenient. They could earn money and explain to everyone everything. And it is in this context that the UN General Assembly resolution Return of Ukrainian Children, adopted on December 3rd this year, which is based on lies and slander, should be viewed. Those who voted for it are effectively covering up the crimes of the Kiev regime against children. And there were also those who did not have the courage to vote against this libel, although many are well aware of the implausibility of anti-Russian insinuations. Our country has always been committed to ensuring the rights and interests of minors, and we call on sensible states not to be taken in by the lies fabricated according to the patterns of Bucha. And no, it's not a coincidence not just to fall prey. It's true. Just do not buy the lies. It's the same patterns they use with Bucha, Izum, and other staged events. You have to believe only the facts. And we have nothing to hide. We're open, and we're open when it comes to talking about children. And the responsible for the children's rights, Lyubova Belova and her colleagues, work around the clock, always timely responding to any incidents, any information, any data that appears. But Ukraine also continues to glorify traitors that is connected with the diversification. On December 4th, Ukrainian media reported on the decision taken by the Kiev City Council to rename a number of streets as part of a policy of diversification and glorification of traitors to the Ukrainian people. The Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, where a monument, as we've already mentioned, to Ivan Mazepa was recently erected, is now located on the street named after him. Formerly, the street was called Lavrskaya Street. Why exactly is the Lavra no longer suitable? Why was Lavrskaya Street no longer suitable for the location of Lavra? Or they will also rename the Lavra to Mazepa as well. That wouldn't be a surprise. Makarenko Street was renamed after the Sheikh Mansour Battalion of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Makarenko is no longer Ukrainian, or what? And Suvorov Street was renamed after Ukrainian nationalist member of the OUN-UPA Lyudmila Foa, Marshal Rokossovsky. Was renamed after the Pavlichka. Another street was renamed after Pavel Pavlichenko, and the Levitan Street was renamed into Lukretska Street because of the Lukrets Lake. The street of Dunayevsky, of the Tsundurovska Street. I'm just wondering, why exactly is Levitan answering for that? For what exactly? I'd like to just understand the logic. Is something wrong with Leviton's nationality? And the street of Suleiman Stelsky of Dagestan's poet was renamed as well. Everyone knows who Suleiman Stelsky is. And you can easily know as well, looking into his poetic heritage. Who is Igor Yukhnovsky? I can give you a hint. He is a public figure who, during the crumble of the USSR, joined the nationalists and headed the infamous National Memory Institute that is trying to propose Ukrainian globe. And now he's a hero, apparently. It's quite symbolic that Petro Poroshenko's European Solidarity Party office has been registered on Ivan Mazepa Street, and the historical pseudo-heroes and current political figures are completely consistent with each other. All the facts that I've mentioned confirm the relevance of the tasks of denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of threats emanating from its territory. All these goals will definitely be achieved, as has repeatedly been mentioned by the representatives of the Russian Federation. That is not everything. I would like, since we've talked about those who finance this terror, the slowing down of terms of the global growth is usually tied with the tariff offensive started by the US. And I would like to state that according to the International Monetary Fund, the GDP growth did not supersede a few percent. According to it amounted to 3% for 2025, 3.2. And one of the deciding factors is the indecisiveness, which aggravated the situation. Global affairs are the consequences of the unilateral limitations introduced by the West and restrictive measures towards the Russian economy. Let's see who they stroke first. They stroke international production supply chains. They disbalanced the investments and trade chains. They've aggravated the debt problem and lowered for many countries access to goods, services, finances, technologies. And it's worth pointing out that the negative effects are continuously felt by those who use them in their own geopolitical interests. The growth of economy of developed countries, according to the IMF, in 2024 did not supersede the level of 1.8%. As for 2025, it's 1.6%. Especially difficult situation is the situations of the old world order. Since 2022 to the first half of the year of 2025, the volume of economic losses of the EU after the anti-Russian sanctions is amounting to 1 to 1.6 trillion euros. And the lagging behind of the potentially possible growth keeps growing of countries like Germany, France, Italy, and the Euro Commission states that the main areas of their action continues to stagnate. And we will remind you that even the European Commission has to admit that suspension of energy cooperation with Russia does not allow leading production of Europe to preserve their compatibility. And by refusing Russian energy sources, they refuse to talk about what will lead for them. It led to the growing prices for energy sources and more expenses for the energy import. Last week we've paid attention to this issue. European Union, according to the Eurostat data, since introducing sanctions against Russia, overpaid for the blue oil about 200 billion euros, and according to Russian experts, actually it's 750 billion euros. But let's look even at the figures that they've presented. It's already clear from that alone the dynamic that we're witnessing. In the energy crisis and policy of non-thought-out decarbonization is leading Europe to deindustrialization, along with high prices on energy carriers. They've also missing another eliminations by denouncing mutually beneficial Russian partnership that brought a lot of benefits and chances of long-term development after the closure of airspace for Russia. Their carriers faced lower competitiveness. As for the heightened length of flights in the Asian direction, and the European timber industry that was oriented in the production of the wood industry of Russia, due to the lack of Russian timber, it led to the growth of prices and the lower competitiveness of their products. And for Finland, which was traditionally in close cooperation with companies in this area, by cutting off ties with Russia, a lot of profiled companies and companies went bankrupt. As a result of 2024, GDP lowered by 0.1% and inflation reached 8.4%. And a very important point, that is not about the countries towards which illegitimate, aggressive, destructive policies being implemented. No, those are the countries enforcing policy towards others. They are the ones showing these results. Can you understand the absurdity of situation? So all the losses are just the tip of the iceberg for the economic bargaining of Russia. Long-term consequences remain to be not counted or assessed, but to be felt for real. But we also have good news. On December 13th, we celebrate 20 years of the joint declaration of the Developed Comprehensive Partnership of the Russian Federation and ASEAN states. That was signed by our leaders at the first Russian-ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur in 2005. This document decided the very important area of development of our connection, as well as laying the basic principles and orientations of the Russian-ASEAN relations. And the 35 years of our bilateral relations will be celebrated next year. And because of this event, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lavrov, sent the well wishes to our ASEAN colleagues. We especially point out the input of Malaysia, which was the president in ASEAN in 2005, as well as our Singapore coordinators of Russian-ASEAN dialogue in preparing and adoption of the joint declaration, which truly decided our partnership and allowed it to reach a strategic level. At another summit in Singapore 2018, association remains our ally and strong partner, and despite the external pressure, we not only preserve the positive dynamic of relations, but mutually beneficial cooperation that will allow us to fully implement the potential of Russian-Asian cooperation. We've received a lot of questions to comment on the situation on the Thailand-Cambodia border. Russia has traditionally been tied of traditionally friendly and cooperation relations with Thailand and Cambodia, which is why we're seriously concerned with another escalation of the offensive at the border between these two friendly states of Russia by using arms. We ask both states to follow the deterrence in order to avoid civilian casualties. We call for a ceasefire and to fully resolve the conflict, including the articles of the joint declaration that was signed on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur on October 26th. We call on both states to resolve the conflict with peaceful measures. We have to constate that the territorial disagreements are the result of the long-term colonial policy of the West. We have to follow the spirit of unity and solidarity in order to overcome historical disagreements. And of course, I have no right but to follow my own calling and your calling and to comment on my favorite topic of highly likely. On October 4th, the UK published another tom of the comic detective, but I have to say what it's called. A 178-page final report on the public investigation of the death of a British citizen, subject of this country, Don Sturgis, in July 2018. Yes, that case in Amesbury where supposedly, after the poisoning substance Novichok that occurred. As we supposed from the beginning, this was a court process, and please do not succumb to temptation and believe that in a public investigation there's any publicity. It's the exact opposite in the British. It's all behind the closed doors. This quasi-court process was started and was used by the British establishment in order to preserve in the public opinion the baseless anti-Russian version of the events, according to which the death of Ms. Sturgis is directly tied with the Skripal's affair, is another provocation around the former employee of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Julia in March 2018, where in Salisbury, which is a neighboring town of Amesbury, it happened. And it's hard to say exactly what happened, because Britain's version, this is the version of tabloids that was fed by British officials, but what truly happened remains a secret, where they are, what happened to them. But we were also told about Novichok and so on and so forth. So the order of the British court was pretty obvious, but it's still senseless. All the responsibility automatically, without any kind of rebuttal, is laid on Russia or on the so-called agents that supposedly acted from the personal approval of the President Putin, and at the same time the introduction of sanctions against the General Office of the General Headquarters of the Armed Forces of Russia, and supposedly 11 Russian citizens tied to it. They needed a pretext, you got it right, to start another anti-Russian story, hysteria campaign, whatever you want to call it. All these myths, Amesbury, Salisbury, whatever they've cooked up. There are long-term resources that is being strained out in time, that is used by the Britain in order to glorify or explain whatever they plan to do against Russia or their own citizens even. And of course we reserve the right for countermeasures. To further showcase the cynicism of the situation, I'd like to remind that the British authorities refused any kind of cooperation with Russian relevant agencies in investigating the incident, including the samples of the substance that they claim was used to poison Skripals, and then Ms. Sturgis died from. Russia's embassy in London sent to the Foreign Office over 60 diplomatic notes with a large list of questions, and most of those remain without an answer, and most of those just received a classical write-off. We could also remind that how English knocked on the doors of all the EU member states, and without any proof stated or what they claimed to be the evidence, and it was published on mass media, turned out to be a PowerPoint of a first grader. It just stated they did it because they could do it and because they've already done it before. Who did it? What are the details? What was used? What is it called? What kind of laboratory research was done? No information. Just a few arrows. There were from 5 to 10 slides, just a school PowerPoint, and not in order to educate, but I mean a school PowerPoint where elementary students prepare a PowerPoint. And then, when this PowerPoint was shown in the British Embassy here, forwarded this PowerPoint to their colleagues from other embassies, a lot followed London's lead, although others decided not to do it. But in private, we asked those who joined that action of sending the Russian diplomats on the expulsion of Russian diplomats. So supposedly we've poisoned them. So we decided to find out why the Russian diplomats were sent away. The Nord Stream was blown up. And now serious people in the Western Europe courts are stating that those were Ukrainian diplomats. Why are they not using terms of expulsion for Ukrainian diplomats? So in private, we asked those who joined that act of sending out of Russian diplomats, did they receive any kind, other than 10 slides, any substantive evidence, other than public statements of London, as you perfectly remember, in the style of highly likely?
Theresa May was in hysteria, and we were answered no. A lot of time we didn't have any information. In the special NATO labs, they didn't reveal this information. This is another lies of Great Britain, the lies to its own allies. A politicized and non-transparent character of this so-called public investigation proves that London was not interested in a just and unbiased investigation. The special services of the UK and politicians of all kinds are striking and jungling with these anti-Russia examples of Russian aggression. And the UK started to wind up the sanction mechanism, blaming Russia with arsons and other terrorist acts. And I think this was masterminded with the main purpose to inflict damage on the international standing of Russia, inventing some other myths about the leadership of Russia. The timelines is worth mentioning. London right now is thinking over how can it meddle in the peaceful process. What else can be done to discredit Russia's efforts? Right now, the UK is wondering why the government does not support peace processes. And I wonder why the UK doesn't vote for the efforts and support the efforts of the overwhelming majority of the United States. And the only answer is we cannot support Russia because Russia was doing bad things with us. It's a very simple fake game, but for a long-term basis. No justice reigns in the UK. There was an interesting chain of events and protests and demonstrations in terms of civil society. Foreign Minister, on the 5th of December, the National Center held a 5th forum, We Are Together, and the meeting was held in the International Association of Volunteers and Non-Profit Organizations, Kindness. The initiative was submitted by volunteers of CIS and supported by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. The establishment of association is lined up with the declaration by the UN of the International Year of Volunteers. The participation in the session of these volunteer organizations was attended by representatives of Brazil, India, Kazakhstan, Russia, Uzbekistan, South Africa. The initiative became a result of a multi-year efforts of making this space of volunteering It reflects long-term partnership between non-profit organizations, and the main mission of the association is to strengthen international humanitarian cooperation between public associations and NGOs of other friendly states. This association will make it possible to share experience, hold joint educational workshops, and take decisions that can advance non-profit sector both in each country and in...
Пятый год подряд, опять же, к работе ее оргкомитета подключается руководство секретариата совещания по взаимодействию и мерам доверия в Азии. В этом году состав жюри секретаря этой структуры Джан Лин, она принимала участие в церемонии награждения победителей в анимации «Код милосердия».
What is the main purpose?